Do that. Okay, so as people are starting to join us, I always fill in a little bit of time with who we are and what we're doing.
Why are we here?
Why are we here? Who are we and what's happening? I always, when I look back at these later on YouTube, I'm always like, what's happening? so, so as you're joining in, join in, relax, and you're here for a great conversation. Just real quick, I'm Julie Slavinsky. I'm the director of events at Warwick's, and we're here with Susan Coll. And Susan is joining us from where?
Washington, D.C.
There you go. Some interesting things happening in the political world
Oh,
today.
yeah.
And I always like to ask, this is a very non-political kind of question. Well, it can be sometimes, I guess. What's the weather like in Washington, D.C. today?
It's a gorgeous day. So you asked a good question. Nice,
Good.
very California weather.
Yeah, because I mean, we've got just like, I think we're 68 degrees, sunny skies. It's amazing here.
Yeah.
And Rachel, you're joining us from?
Toronto, Canada, and the weather here is I always catch myself in transposing the temperature from Canadian to American, but again, it's balmy. There's lots of bright colors and spring. It's
Spring has
here
sprung.
for sure. Yeah.
Spring has sprung. Yeah, it's lovely. So for today's event, Rachel and Susan are going to chat for about 35 minutes. I'll come back on with any audience questions. So we always love to hear audience questions. So there's a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Pop a question in there if you have one. In the chat, I'm going to put how to order the book from us. If you're in San Diego, which is where we are located, I love the cover too.
It's so good.
Real life and other stories. If you're located in San Diego, we'd love for you to come by the store, but we can ship books anywhere. Sorry, we can't ship to Canada, but we can ship anywhere in the US. So
that's
okay.
You can go we still love Canadian. You.
We still love you too, Rachel. And there's great bookstores in Canada that you can buy this from. So that's the good thing, right?
Support indie. They're all a community, right? Like Susan, you work at indie. Julie, you're a community.
All of us.
Independent bookstore. There's an unspoken bond, no matter where you are internationally, with independent bookstores.
There truly is. I mean, it really is something that we all support each other, and we all are very much a part of, lifting each other up is why we're here today. So I'll quit jabbering. I'll introduce these two wonderful women, and then I'll go away for a little while. So Susan Coll is the author of 6 novels, including The Stagger, a New York Times and Chicago Tribune editor's choice. Her 3rd novel, Acceptance, was made into a television movie starring the hilarious Joan Cusack, which I love her. Susan's work has appeared in publications including the New York Times Book Review, the Washington Post, Washingtonian Magazine, Moment Magazine, NPR.org, Atlantic.com, and The Millions. And like Rachel said, she works at an independent bookstore in Washington, D.C. And she's here today to talk about her latest book, Real Life and Other Fictions. And I love that title, I have to say. That's a great title. And joining us is the ever wonderful Rachel McMillan, busiest woman in the business, a champion of so many authors, and an absolute favorite here at Warwick's. Rachel is the author of The London Restoration, The Mozart Code, having a little Mozart Code, The Herringford and Watts Mysteries, the Van Buren and DeLuca Mysteries, and the 3/4 Time series of contemporary Viennese romances. And she has so many things in the works right now, it's going to boggle your mind. So we'll talk about that later, probably. You two have a great conversation, and I'll see you in a little bit.
Thanks so much,
Thank you, Julie.
And thank you so much, Susan. I am so fangirling out here that you were able to find time to talk to me about your new book.
Thank you. Now I'm honored to be talking with you, given I want to just talk about you and hear all that you're doing.
Well, I just know that you are so tapped into the book world, and I want readers to know that, yes, Susan's books have a really prestigious history to them, and obviously they've been labeled and awarded some wonderful things, editor's choice, some really wonderful, magnificent things, but also they're very accessible and very readable. And I thought I'd start with asking, because you and I, we have the same editor, we work with the same team, so it's almost like we're from the same family in a way. Was this your working title? I think readers should or viewers should know that often titles go through a committee decision, and the titles authors have in their head are not always the titles that end up on the cover of the book. What did this process look like
Yeah,
for
that's
you?
a good question. No, this was not the original title. This was a kind of team effort to come up with this title. I always have a title in mind, except with this book. And my working title was The Wonder, because the
Oh,
book is about a sort of wondrous event, and it speaks to also to the narrator wondering. I don't know how much I should get into the story yet, but and then I had hoped to have a title that had something to do with the Mothman. But that was deemed maybe not the best idea, because it's anyway, I went through a long process, and this is the end result. So I
I
think it
love it.
works, but
And the Mothman, I actually ghost wrote, and this is ironic when you hear what it was. I ghost wrote a travel guide to haunted American hotels a few years ago. And that's when I first learned about the Mothman. And I went down a deep rabbit hole, as one does as an author when you're procrastinating. It's like, okay, I'm just going to find out everything about this. And it's really, really fascinating and kind of um terrifying, but also whimsical, and just suits the tone of the book. Was this a subject of fascination for you for a long time? Or how did
yeah.
Mothman show up in this story?
Yeah, I mean, for those listening who haven't read the book yet, the just general sort of premise of the book is that the main character is the survivor of a bridge collapse, a real bridge collapse in West Virginia in 1967, that connected Point Pleasant, West Virginia to Ohio. And it was catastrophic. To this day, it's one of the worst bridge collapses in modern history. 46 people died. And in the year or so before the bridge collapse, there were multiple sightings in the area of a giant creature thought to be part man, part moth. So the story of this bridge collapse is kind of intertwined with the legend of the Mothman. And I'm not from West Virginia. I don't know anyone who was involved in this bridge collapse, but I've always been fascinated by that story. So that's where that all fits in.
And this is a really eclectic book. It has some wonderful whimsy. It's very esoteric. I love your sense of humor. And readers, viewers, I almost want to say it's like Nora Ephron meets Remarkably Bright Creatures, because it
Hmm.
has that very knowing, warm, intimate tone and voice between you and the reader, but it also has this fantastic and kind of comical but wonderful sense, as you say, of wonder. And your life is books. And right now, with Bookish People and Real Life and Other Fictions, you're writing books about books. Do you ever find that in your writing or in your day job, you just want to step away from books, or do they inform and infuse every part of who you are?
Yeah, that's a good question. I kind of live books. Yes, I work now part-time. I used to be full-time running the events at a bookstore. And yeah, I've just got book galleys all over the place. And but I think in a way it works. It puts what I'm doing, when you're an author, it's easy to just become very sort of self-absorbed with what you're doing and worried about the outcome, and just kind of thinking about it all the time. And somehow working in the bookstore, being surrounded by other people's books, takes the pressure off. And
Yeah.
I can never articulate this in quite the right way, but when you're working in a bookstore, like, the books are just inventory. They could be tennis shoes, they could be,
Yeah.
light bulbs. They're just pieces of inventory. So psychologically, that takes the pressure off all of this sort of precious energy we put into our work. And it feels like, every sentence the world is hanging on when you're writing, but when you're actually just selling books, it's just a book. So it makes it easier in a hard to articulate way.
No, I get that. And it can be really a bit of a safety net too.
Yeah, I mean, your life is books as well.
My life is my day job is as a literary agent. I'm always writing. But I do find that I am able to do what I do because of the interaction with authors and books. That always comes. I'm always going to be a reader first and foremost. And that really helps a lot because I can always just go back to reading.
Yeah,
And
that's a good way to put it. I would agree with that.
and Susan and I actually share an editor, and she is sometimes my psychiatrist, often my cheerleader, also the person who tells me things that, you never want to hear, but it's like, oh, you are so right. You're seeing the book beyond my vision of what it could possibly be. It's such an amazing skill editors have. It's such a unique talent. And she's known as one of the best in the business, as she should be. Are there any instances where the book expanded or changed in the editorial process? Did it take on a new form for you? Did you add or subtract? How did that look for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. She is one of the best editors I've ever worked with. And she really, really edits. A lot of editors just give a kind of drive-by notes, but she really digs in. And with both of these books, I think I've got a dog at my door just scratching, which
Oh,
that
I
noise.
love when animals show up.
With both of these books, she was able to just bring out parts of the book that I hadn't seen myself, just sort of hidden themes that I needed to expand on. With the last book, Bookish People, she even suggested sort of really minimizing one of the characters. And so she sent me on pretty major rewrites with both books. But she was right. She was right. And it really, I think, made both of the books much better. So I think we're both very fortunate. If Kim, if you're listening, we both love you.
That trust and collaboration is just, and she is so, and editors are, I wish their names could be on the covers because they see an end result that sometimes we can't even imagine. She's as invested in the end product as we are, which is just wonderful. And one of the things she told me when she first signed you is that you had a sense of humor that I was absolutely going to love. And humor is so subjective. And yet there is some surrealism, some observational tone. And Cassie is such a wonderful place, a wonderful person who opens up the cupboards of her mind and allows us to sit down for a while. Do you find that it just comes naturally to you, or did you have to finesse some of the humorous tone through subsequent drafts of the book?
Yeah, it's funny. When I started off writing, I did not think I was writing humor. My first novel was very dark subject, having to do with Karl Marx's daughter who had committed suicide. So I thought I was writing a historical novel about a very dark subject, but it had humorous elements with a contemporary story that was intertwined with the history. And every editor who looked at it said, this is very funny, let's get rid of this other stuff and pump up the humor. So for many years in my work, I shied away from the comedy. That wasn't what I wanted to be writing. I wanted to be writing gorgeous literary fiction, but everything I wrote, just everyone said it was funny. So I finally, with the last two books, kind of learned to embrace that piece of who I am and just lean into the humor. And with this book, it was a little more of a challenge because I'm writing about a very tragic story. So when I describe the book to people and then, I can see their faces drop, I'm writing about a horrible bridge collapse and someone who was orphaned, but it is, as you said, it's a whimsical book and there is a lot of humor. So it's hard for me to even explain how that is, but that's just where my mind and my hands go as I'm typing.
And I don't think it diminishes the literary merit of the book. When I say humor to any viewers, I'm not talking about slapstick, ha funny like you'd see in a comedy film. It's a very wry and erudite humor that's more rooted in an observation on the human condition. And I find that it's a wonderful response to the tragedy because it allows us to see how one person is able to continue life and relationships and work even while reconciling the past. I find it very hopeful. And one of the things I love about your writing voice is the arresting and immediate first person. How did you get into Cassie's headspace? Did you do any exercises? Did you audition moments with her? Did you play around a little, or did she just sit down in your head and start to talk?
Yeah, I the latter. I just kind of knew who she was and could hear her voice, and she came to me pretty easily, Cassie. I don't do any of the kind of workshopping things that I probably ought to do
I know
because
I'm the same. I'm a terrible writer. I'm like, whatever.
yeah, when I did my first reading from this book last week, because the book just came out, just over a week ago, I hadn't read it aloud, which I now realize I hear people say they do that. And I kind of wish I had, because when I was reading from the opening pages, it suddenly sounded a little different to me than it had on the page. So I think I would have cut more words and made it move more quickly, which everyone told me to do, but you can't
I never
see
do
it.
that either. But on Twitter the other day, someone said, is it recommended that people type out their entire draft once after writing it a second time? Like,
Ooh.
who has time for that? No one has time to do that. That's just,
Wow.
don't do that.
Wow.
There's no
I've
time.
also heard you should read backwards, which I did do with one book, because it does then force you to isolate every sentence because it's out of context if you just read it.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that helped me sharpen the writing, but that's not something I'm doing anymore.
No, but it works because there really isn't a wasted word in this novel. It's so beautifully put
Oh,
together. I actually read it twice. I really loved it.
thank you.
I
Much
read it like I learned so much about voice and character and interactions. And I'm a huge fan of anything that deals with the sense of forged family or unexpected community. And this is especially important to someone like Cassie, who has the past that she does. And I find that especially in the realm of the written words, where we have a history of popular novels that are based on forged family. I mean, look at Dickens. He's captain of Everybody's an Orphan.
True,
Do
true.
you, right now, especially, there's a million and one books about books in every genre. Everything's about a bookstore, a librarian, a bookseller, whether they're my friend Madeline Martin writing about librarian spies or romances about books, especially in the age of social media connectivity, Zoom like we're doing now, and TikTok, which has kind of overtaken the word of mouth experience of selling books. Why do you feel we're drawn to the tactical, almost historical prescience of tangible written word right now to broaden our understanding of the world? Is there a reason it's so important for us right now to dive into fictions and bookish people in print?
Well, that's a good question and not one I've thought about or the answer to, but I would say for the popularity part, I mean, people who love to read about books. So I think
Yeah.
part seems pretty straightforward. I've written this is my seventh book, and I think I got the most reaction to bookish people of any book because people just love the insider bookstore experience. And this new book is about, it's not about a bookstore, but it's about a writing instructor. And I was channeling some of that from my own experience, what it's like to teach writing, and then you wind up with all these stories in your head. So this book is more about storytelling
Yes.
than books. But you know, after teaching for about 20 years, I've had so many students and so many stories, and a lot of the stories you don't know how they end because you only saw the beginnings, or you left people struggling with the draft. And a lot of them are just, they're in my head. I feel like that's who I am, really. I'm just a compilation of everything I've read at this point. So that's not
I
really an
love
answer
it.
to your
No, but
question.
it's interesting because there is, as we said earlier, there is an unspoken community between independent bookstores throughout the world, whether you're, where I am in Canada or in America, but the same for people who live in the world of story, whether we ever show them to other people or whether we write them for ourselves. And the idea that you've worked with students and you don't necessarily know if you'll ever know the end of those stories, that's
Yeah.
a really fascinating thing, because Cassie's story does, spoiler alert, end with a finality that is going to make you feel satisfied, reader. That's all I'll say. We leave her in a good place. Now you've curated so many events in your job at a bookstore, and you clearly have developed a renowned palette for wonderful reading experiences. What most completes your desired checklist when you open a book? What are a few things that make you just fall in love?
Well, I think a combination of really good writing. If it's poorly written, I'm not going to get very far, which I
Yeah.
think is part of what makes it a little easier to, to parse what books one wants to read, or what manuscripts are going to be kind of worth trying to help perfect. If I'm working, which I'm not really doing at the moment, but if I'm working as a paid editor, I'm not going to take on something that I just don't think I can be helpful on. So, just an innate good writing, but we all love plot, a
Yeah.
good plot, even in a sort of, a deeply literary novel, it's still helpful to have some story running through it to keep the pages turning, and compelling characters. So yeah, sometimes you just open a book and it's just like delicious from
You just
the
know.
get-go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are rare. I mean, there's a lot of good books out there for sure, but a lot of them you're just kind of forcing yourself through because everybody loves this book and you need to be reading it or figuring out why, or you need to be reading it for work or one reason or another. So and ultimately almost every book is worthwhile and I'm going to have
Absolutely.
read it, but there's still just like that certain few that are like kind of, dynamite that you just pick up and say, oh my gosh, I'm going to stay up all night and read this. So.
And I love when those hit, because sometimes with the really popular books, like, why?
Yeah.
Why? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't discount them. It's wonderful that people love them. I just wonder what I'm not seeing. Sarah
Yeah.
Perry
I
in,
tell
yeah.
my students or anyone who asks this question that I like to read both high and low. Like I like to read the books that remind me why I love reading and why I aspire to write, that sometimes leave me depressed because like I'm never going to be able to write a book like that, but it's nourishing. And then I like to read what's dominating the bestseller lists, which sometimes are good books, but often, my reaction is I can write better than that. So that kind of motivates
And
me.
they're fun.
Yeah.
One writer who does this for me is Sarah Perry. She wrote Melmoth and the Essex Serpent, and I find she hits on all cylinders. And I just, her new
Yeah.
one, Enlightenments, is out in a month, and I'm just so excited.
Yeah.
And speaking to your own work, what comes first? The plot, the setting, the character, or in this case, the Mothman? Did Mothman come first in this one?
You know, it's almost always setting driven for me. It's taken me a long time to know that that is the answer. It's setting or it's situational. It's some event that is going on in the world or in my life that finally crosses the line to comedy. That was true of my book's Acceptance, which was about college admissions. That was the one that was made into a movie with Joan Cusack, or a
Which I
television.
totally saw.
Oh, did
And
you?
I did not make that connection. I totally remember watching that. And then I Googled it. I was like, wait a second, you are so
Oh, well,
famous.
I'm glad you saw it. Joan was very funny, but with that, that book came to me because at the time I had 3 kids and, approaching college age, and they went to a very competitive public high school where every kid was a genius and every parent, had Ivy League aspirations for their kids. And I found myself getting really like sucked into this whole drama. And it was when I just realized how absurd it all was and all of the parental behavior that I got the idea for that book. And then the book after that was called Beach Week, and it was sort of the same thing. It was these parents, myself included, sending our children off for a week of debauchery at the beach to celebrate graduation. And what can go wrong? And why are the parents even involved in accommodating these plans? So again, that just seemed ripe for comedy to me. So it's either situational, being in a bookstore, or just settings. One of my books, Rockville Pike, just came from observing the setting where F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda were buried, on a really busy strip in Rockville, Maryland, across the street from a giant furniture store. All I had to do was see that, and like, there's a novel here. So yeah,
Wonderfully absurdist.
yeah,
I need to find that one because that's just, I love that.
yeah. It's quite a moving experience to go see their grave site. It's usually filled with mementos. People still come to visit it, but it's on this very busy street, and there's still the giant furniture store right there. So I set the book in the giant furniture store.
Oh, of course you did.
So that's how my
That's
mind works.
amazing.
Yeah.
There are moments, oh my gosh, that you write, to pun on your previous release title, like a truly bookish person. And there's one line that I underlined. I play with the tense, changing it from present to past, from past to present again and again before deciding to leave it in the past. I loved that because you're contextualizing the world of writing and creation, but in an image that so many of us can really relate to, the idea of trying to perfect and re-edit things that have happened. And obviously the reconciliation between Cassie's past and her present is a major motif in the story. So I thought that I'd end with a question that, you might not have an answer for, but do you believe that great writers have to be great readers?
I do. I'm often surprised. It doesn't happen a lot, but I've taught classes where we'll go around, icebreakers, getting to know each other, and what are you reading? And occasionally people just say, I don't read. It's like, if you don't read, how can you write? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure maybe there are exceptions out there of people who write but don't read, but I don't understand that. And even when I'm writing, I still find it very helpful to be reading, because I'm paying attention to the crafting of sentences, or even reading a book in my own kind of genre, such as it is, that's very successful. I hear people say that throws them off, but for me, it just kind of fires me up because I'll see like, why is this book so successful? Oh, I see, because she's really good with dialogue, and how can I do a better job of writing?
Yeah. I'm the
Well,
same way.
yeah,
It's like my battery power and my fuel. I'm not
yeah,
someone who can't read. I actually find it bolsters me. I don't try to be like what I'm reading, but it definitely revs me up to want to try.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
and that is the end of my official questions. You are so smart. It was so nice to talk to
Oh,
you.
thank
So,
you.
Julie,
Those are
come back
great
on and
questions. And there's Julie.
It was so good. I was loving everything about it. I mean, because I was giggling about the parents behaving badly, because I think we all have been, all of us that have children that have gone through that. Oh my God.
Yeah, you just
We
think
could
that
all
you're
have
going to rise
tons of
above it,
information.
but
It's horrible. So, I always love to, and I want to find out what y'all are working on next, and some other things in a little bit. But Susan, what's been because okay, you've dealt with authors, and you're an author and you're doing all of this. What's been the most fun from your personal experience about writing books and launching books? And what's the most fun that you've had with doing all of that?
I think I like the writing part the most days, not every day. Because I think it's such a privilege to be able to just sit and go into this other world and play with words and um make up stories, and some of that probably speaks to my personality. I'd really most of the time rather just be doing that. I'm not super extroverted. The launching books, I mean, when you get to this stage where you get to talk to people about it and do events like this, it's very fun. But the lead up to that is kind of harrowing because
Painful?
you're putting this thing out into the world and you don't know how it's going to be received, and it feels I didn't realize until this week how kind of wound up I was. And now that it's out and people seem to be responding nicely to it, I'm like, it's all good. But a week ago I was losing sleep, and so yeah.
Because I have, we deal with same thing, Susan, what we do, and you deal with so many authors asking questions. And I ultimately say, and there's so much out of your hands. There's
Yeah.
so much out of your hands that if you're not loving writing and enjoying that, then you got to think about what you're doing.
Oh, exactly. And I've had people who were thinking of taking my classes ask me, how much money can I make and can I quit my job? And like, no,
no,
you've got to
no,
be
you
doing
can't.
this because you have to do it and because you
Right.
love writing. That's really the only reason. The rest is, it's gravy if good things happen, but it's
Right.
not it shouldn't be the expectation.
No, and I want to tell them, if there was a magic pill on how to make a bestseller, every publisher would be doing it every day. And
And
so
they
there is not a
try.
magic pill.
They
Yeah.
do try, and we see the clone copies of, I can't tell you how many books I've read
Right.
recently that are Emily Henry again. Like
Right.
it's just that everyone wants to
Yeah.
try, or
Yeah.
the Fourth Wing, everyone wants to try, or they want to force writers to be on TikTok because TikTok worked for Colleen Hoover,
Right.
and you can't make something organic
No.
Yeah.
a package.
No, it has
It's
to, and the sad part about it is there are some very, very, very good books that never seem to rise. And it's just, you just go crazy. And it's like, why isn't this more popular?
Yeah. And you
And
see
that's the
that
tragedy.
Yeah, you especially see that, well, in all of our worlds, because I'm sure Rachel sees it as an agent.
Right.
But in the bookstore, we have a room, which you probably have at Warwick's too, full of the galleys. And
yeah.
I see all of these galleys, and only a fraction of them are even going to make it onto the shelves of the bookstore, never mind, become bestsellers. So
Right.
yeah.
And that's the thing where the reality of the reading time that all of us have, is we're all very voracious readers, but even we only read a certain number of books a year, and so it's just with the hundreds of thousands that are published every year. So, but I love to say that I love that you love to write. That's the most fun part about it. Okay, so we do have a question. So this is a two-parter. So I'll start with the second one first, I think. Did you have the idea for Real Life before Bookish People was published? She's so impressed because the latter was just out in August of 22.
Yeah, that's a good question. I did have this idea for a very long time. I heard about the Mothman probably about 12, 15 years ago. And I'm not the sort of person who normally does this, but I was so intrigued that I went by myself to West Virginia, 6-hour drive, got a hotel room and went to the Mothman Festival. And then I thought I would write a novel, and it didn't really come together. I didn't try very hard, but I began to draft a novel and then I set it aside. So I did write the whole thing and reinvented it. I didn't have anything to really go back to in the time since Bookish People was finished. So I did write it relatively quickly, but I had the idea. It had
The idea
maybe
was earlier.
been sort of percolating for so long that it was a little easier to write.
Right, because that's the thing. It's like it's got to like kind of just noodle in there for a
Yeah,
while, and then all of a sudden
exactly.
it just like comes out.
Yeah.
And the next part of our question is, what are some of the books that remind you why you write? It's a really interesting question.
Well, I think it speaks a little to what I was saying about reading, reading for pure pleasure and then reading for the kind of, oh my God, that's amazing. And I love to read memoir. That's probably my favorite thing to read. I'm trying to think of the last great memoir I read, the Copenhagen trilogy that came out it came out a long time ago because the author's no longer living, but it was published in the US only recently. Every memoir that you've heard of, Cheryl Strayed and Mary Carr. I'll read just about any memoir because it's just a way to see how people live. And I love the kind of craft of many of those. I'm about to read the book that just won the Booker, the Kairos, Jenny Erpenbeck.
Oh yeah.
Which I expect will be that kind of book for me. It just everything about it sounds like the kind of book that like will set my head on fire. But then I also love to read Emily Henry. I love to read fun books, and I see why she's so successful. She's really got all of these books. Even when I was teaching, I assigned I'm now forgetting the name. What's the big vampire?
Oh, the Twilight books?
Twilight books. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have them read that because I want everyone to see like, why are they so successful? And there's always a reason. I mean, even if it seems like it's not high literature, there's always something there that's working. So, yeah. So not sure if that answered the question, but
yeah, no, it definitely did. Yeah, it's definitely, but it is that thing that you go back, which I think is interesting because you read memoir but write fiction. So it's an interesting difference in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Rachel, you got to tell us what's close to being done and what you're working on, lady.
So I think Susan can know this. Operation Scarlet was supposed to be out, but for some reason that book kept falling apart. It's a World War II historical. Poor Kim has been the patience of a saint. And it's one of those things that the more drafts I did, the more it just collapsed on itself.
Oh.
And I'm pretty open on social media that I have a severe panic and anxiety disorder. And often it comes when I get really into the frustration of, oh my gosh, it's not working. And I used to be able to meet deadlines and this one needs more work. Then I get so nervous. I can't literally type. Like I get so in my headspace. So it's been an uphill climb. The team has been very supportive. So that will come out soon. It's in line edits. I do have a book out coming November 14th with Janelle Sazelski and Amy Runyon with Harper Muse, and it's called The Liberty Scarf, and it's set in World War One, and it is a scarf from Liberty of London, that beautiful department store, and the way that it influences 3 different women during the Great War overseas. So that is fantastic. I also have
Wow. I
a
want to hear more
biography.
about that.
Yeah,
How did
it's
the
so
three of
good. We'll
you
get you
work
a copy.
together on that?
It's been so fun. And then I have, of course, I've been writing for the past 2 years a biography of Sir Christopher Wren, the architect, for Pen and Sword in the UK. And then I've got a few more contracted books with our team that I just can't talk about yet. But gosh, if you guys can all just like put all your positive energy into me crossing the last hurdle of Operation Scarlet, because I love the book, but gosh, am I ever sick of editing it?
Oh, I bet. That's the hard
And I
part.
think
And it's just, yeah.
authors, it's so easy to think, well, I can do this. It's very different than any other project because you have to, it's not like a deadline for a school assignment because you
Right.
have to be creatively there. And it's just been a bit of a slog. So that's what's keeping me busy. I'm also doing some teaching consulting, obviously, peddling books as a literary agent, and doing some stuff for you coming up.
Doing all the fun stuff, right? Doing all these,
Yeah.
this is the fun part of your day, right?
This is the fun part. This is like, hey, other authors know how terrifying this job is.
That is a lot that you have on your plate, though.
Oh,
I mean,
shoot.
that's
Like I said,
astonishing.
I wasn't lying. Busiest person in the business, I swear.
Yeah.
Single
I swear.
gal, I'm gonna hustle until Colin Firth marries me, and
Love it. Love it. You're so funny. Susan, I know this book just came out, but it's always the question that we ask. What are you working on next?
I do have another one that again has to do with the literary world. We're trying to find a title for it, but it has to do with a literary nonprofit, and it has at the moment, although I'm not sure that it will, I hope it may stay, but I'm open to the suggestion that it should change, but it features one of the characters from Bookish People. So
oh, that's
okay.
so fun.
yeah, so if I'm told to change that, we'll see. Maybe I will, but I'm hopeful that's working because I like this character and I'm finding it much easier to write when I already know who the character is. That hadn't occurred to me until I started this book, and there's, I don't need to invent anything about her because I already know her pretty well. So that's
And that's
making
going to be kind of fun to do because it's like it's not like people would have to read Bookish People to read it, but
right.
it's just a whole other thread that you can take off on.
Yeah, and it takes us into a completely different landscape. So none of the other characters from that book are there other than in maybe referenced or a brief cameo. But,
right. And that's the fun part too, that if they
yeah.
read the newer one, they can always have the other one to go back to, which I always love that too. As a
Yeah,
bookseller.
I do
As a
have
bookseller, we love that.
yeah, I've got a couple of Easter eggs in real life and other fictions of characters that pop up. But so far it's early. No one's noticed it yet. So it's early and you'd have to
Oh, should we do a
really
spoiler?
I love
Well, a
that.
character in West Virginia looks very familiar to Cassie and she can't figure out why. And it goes back to the bookstore. So
Okay.
I love that.
Me
She's
too.
created an entire universe.
I
So
love
cool.
it. I do love that. Susan, it's been wonderful having you. If people want to follow, do you do any social media? Do you do Instagram or anything?
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram. So
Okay.
you can find me there. And
It's just Susan Coll.
It's Susan Keselenko Coll, but
Okay.
I think if you just put my name in, you'll be able to find me. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And Rachel, you're all over the place.
I'm everywhere. Mostly, I love Twitter because I love helping the writing community. But
I know.
Rach Kmick, RACHKMC is my handle all over the place, and I'm always talking about what I'm reading.
Yeah,
So
that's always fun too. That's
yeah.
always the fun part. Lifting up everybody. Ladies, it was great having you.
Thank you
So
so
nice
much,
to see you,
Julie
Julie.
and
And thank you
Rachel.
so much, Susan. I'm such a big fan, and I hope for every possible success for this book.
Oh, thank you. And I can't wait to read your new book. And I'm
I-
sending you all the vibes.
Thank
Love it.
you.
Yeah, we're sending the vibes to get those edits done.
Yes, it can
All
happen.
right, everybody.
Thanks
Have
so
a good
much.
night.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.